Avaya has changed my life.
Avaya has made me the woman I am today.
Avaya is my home.
Avaya is personal freedom.
Avaya is the reason my life continuously improves.
Let everyone in your life know about Avaya.
Everyone needs to know about this amazing company.
Thank you, Avaya, for appearing in my inbox.
What Ike Allen and Andy Anderson have created at Avaya is what the world needs.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Avaya University. My name is Tara Brooke, and I am the Director of Contemporary Christian Education. Thank you so much for joining us. So our fellow teacher today is Lacy Estelle. She will be talking to us about toxic relationships and is your relationship redeemable? So Lacy Estelle is an ADHD mom, both parenting ADHD children and parenting while struggling with ADHD herself. She is a survivor of domestic violence and has chronicled her journey with ADHD, her toxic marriage, codependency, and faith on her blog, lacyestelle.com. Lacy, I'm so excited that you're here with us today.
Thank you. Yes, and thank you for having me. I'm really excited to do this.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and dive into the questions here that I have for you. So in your experience, how does faith play a role inside a toxic relationship, both when you're in it and even after you leave the relationship?
So in my own experience, my faith played a huge role. Definitely my understanding of the role that I was supposed to play in marriage. And I would rather even say my misunderstanding of the role I was supposed to play in marriage. I almost feel like at times my faith trapped me into thinking that I couldn't leave that toxic environment for fear of, just incurring this wrath with God. And I also felt fear of, if I'm supposed to be a Christian woman and a Christian wife, how come this is so difficult for me to do? But I think that the better understanding that I have now of the gospel, especially once I did get out of my toxic situation and my domestic violent relationship and marriage, really helped to open my eyes to the redeeming quality of Christ and allowed me to really more deep in my faith, to be honest. Now I would say my faith is stronger than it ever was, but it definitely plays a huge role both in allowing you to survive the marriage that you're dealing with or the toxic relationship that you're dealing with, and then also in allowing you to heal from it, whether that is something that you do outside of the marriage or something that you do within it.
Yeah, I think that is kind of a common theme that, people feel like they're going to disappoint God if they don't give it the, biggest try or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
So, and, because of that, I mean, do you feel like women in the Christian church struggle with toxic relationships or even domestic violence and they're not speaking up about it?
I do actually. And I have talked to pastors about it who seem to have a misunderstanding of the manipulative qualities that can be happening in a domestic violence relationship. You have a power wheel that is constantly churning where, you have the aggressor in the relationship or the abuser in the relationship it's constantly manipulating in ways that are really demeaning to the woman or, whoever it is in the relationship, whether sometimes you see destructive relationships like this between a parent and a child. But the way that they manipulate is basically they, rather than I feel like on a surface level, the understanding I had of abuse was, if he hits you or if he hurts you in any way, you just leave. But it really is not that simple, because once it gets to that point, the foundational, block that the woman or the victim in general was standing on is just crumbling beneath them. Because it's really more a process of they go after your self-esteem and your self-confidence. You start to actually question your own sanity and if you're okay, and if you are, if you're just making it all up in your head and you're causing all these problems, because that's the way they portray it to you. And it becomes so confusing that by the time you're at that point where you're like, maybe I need to leave, you're so worried that if you mention it to anybody, especially in the church, that they're just going to tell you that you just need to be, just need to put your head down and be a better wife. I had, in my own experience, I had friends who had a very large misunderstanding of what domestic violence and what a toxic relationship truly was. And I would recant to them, or I would, explain to them the arguments me and my ex-husband would have. And they would say, well, it just sounds like he needs for you to, do the dishes his way, or do the things he's asking of you. But it really actually came down to, that was the problem that he was capitalizing on that point. But it was always really, the root of the problem was always controlling me. If it wasn't that on that day, it would be something else the next day and something else the next day. It was a constant wheel of, I just can't make him happy. There's nothing that makes him happy, and there must just be something wrong with me.
Yeah, I read somewhere that emotional abuse is a lot of times way worse than physical abuse, because literally it breaks down the foundation of your own self-confidence. And it's like, it makes you feel like you're nothing. And then by the time it does get to the actual physical abuse, you're so broken that you don't know what to do. So, and it is hard when you're talking to people in the church sometimes, because, they may say, well, God doesn't want you to get divorced. And it's like, well, that's crazy. It's like, God doesn't want me to be abused either, so right. I don't know. I think it's kind of a difficult balance sometimes. So what do you think, like when someone's marriage like ends, like what sort of feelings or emotional struggles does somebody go through when they're like wrestling with their faith after that?
So I personally, so I can't speak to everyone, but I actually, and I'll come back to another viewpoint I heard of this same type of situation. When I personally left my marriage, I questioned everything. I questioned what I understood about what God wanted me to do, if I could really hear from him, because when I got married, I was under the impression that that was the thing God wanted me to do, which it may have been. But then for my marriage to end felt like, well, wait, did I actually hear from God? Was that actually something that was God inspired, or was that just Lacy inspired? And then how do I differentiate between that? Where is my discernment? Do I really have a good understanding of who God is and what he wants from me? If it's not this. Yeah. So for me, I feel like you can go through a really long struggle with faith, especially after your marriage ends, especially if you thought that marriage was what God called you to do. But I have seen, and I have met other women who were in similar circumstances with us, who actually said that upon deciding to leave, they felt closer to God than ever before, that God actually walked with them through that. And I think there's a lot in that. And that would be, I want to validate women who experience that. It was not my experience. But I like that in some instances, they drew closer to God. I feel like if I had, I went through a phase after my divorce of kind of just some selfish behavior, because I just questioned a lot of my previous choices. Sure. And when I did finally get the craving that the Holy Spirit puts on you to like learn and really fill yourself with knowledge of God and his word and what his word says, that was really when I came to a better understanding and felt closer to God than anything else. But it took a long time to get there. I do wish I had done it sooner. So
sure. We all do, I feel the same way. I've gone into a dark place myself, and it's like, gosh, hindsight 2020, if I would have just known. And you see other people going through bad things too, and you're just like, oh, I just wish that I could just, if you could just know what I know now, it just would make your life so much easier. But in a way, I kind of feel like God might put us in those places to go through the hard stuff so we can have a testimony, so we can help others, So, and maybe that was why, you ended up marrying this person. Maybe that was God, and then maybe this was just a tough thing you had to go through because he knew how much you would impact people in the future.
That's always my hope. I kind of look back over, because, I don't know exactly what my story will be later. My biggest focus, as always, is my children, and making sure that, I'm doing everything I can and parenting them and making sure that I help them have a good understanding of the gospel and God and who he is. But I do look back over, my, the women that came before me in my family, and the things that they went through. And, my grandma, she did not have a very good upbringing. She did not have a very good, I guess, compared to society standards, what anybody would consider a comfortable life. But she knew what was important. And the gospel was at the heart of absolutely everything she did. She did everything with Jesus in mind. And so when I kind of thought about that, I thought of the impact she had on me, as just an extremely humble woman who understood that, God is bigger than her choices and God is bigger than her decisions. And, ultimately his plan will win out. And I think that, when I wonder when I went through a wondering of if it was a good thing or a bad thing, it took me a while to kind of reminded me of, I believe it's Isaac or Jacob. No, it's Jacob, who wrestles with God. And I was like, okay, if this is what you want me to do, because, as a survivor, it was really scary to start talking about what I had experienced and about what I still have to parent with that person. So, there's a lot to be said for that. So I will say that any strength I have in talking about the situation and trying to help others definitely comes from the Lord. It does not come from me.
Yeah, I hear that, honestly. So when someone feels compelled to stay in a toxic relationship, basically out of the obedience of their faith, really, what do you think some tangible steps could be? I mean, whether it's a woman or anybody, that's in a relationship like that, what kind of steps can they take to give them like a new perspective on it?
I think that one of the first steps that I did was, one of the first things a lot of people will tell you to do is talk to other people. And I do think that that is important. But you want to make sure that if you do talk to somebody, that they have a very good understanding. You don't want to just talk to just anybody. And then I would also say you want to talk to somebody who is a Christian who maybe has been there. I actually found solace in like the 12-step meetings. I attended Celebrate Recovery for a period of time. And there's varying situations where because I've done a lot of reading now on toxic relationships and abusive spouses, where there's varying circumstances where some women will stay in the abusive situation, and some women will not. And really, ultimately, as much as I always want to tell people that, God didn't want you to live this way, if you have a better understanding of the gospel and exactly what he wants for our lives, he does not want your spouse to abuse you. That is not okay at all. And I do want for them to leave those situations, just for the safety of them and their children. But ultimately, whether you get a final divorce or just separate from your spouse or anything along those lines is a very personal choice. But taking the right steps, having a good understanding of exactly what abuse looks like, is what helped me the most. I had somebody tell me that I was being abused several months before I actually woke up to it and I realized what was really happening. The other thing I would say would be to evaluate the person's actions. A lot of times we will, we hear things. And I think this is something too with like ADHD, I found we sometimes have a struggle with like social concept. We will talk to people and we'll think one thing is, we'll misinterpret some social cues. We can value words way higher than we actually pay attention to actions. So I think as a spouse, when you kind of start to wake up and you take the steps to look at the person who you wonder if they're abusing you's actions and contrast it to what they actually say. In doing that, it kind of helps you to decipher the coded language of abuse, and then start to really understand their tactics and what they're doing. Because a lot of times, man, they are so good at just pulling you in to those arguments or to trying to reason with them. And you really just got to try to keep a level head and look at the big picture and not allow for your emotions to take over. When you start doing that, you wake up pretty quick. It awakens you, and then you start to kind of realize that you're being manipulated, which then becomes a whole nother thing of trying to figure out, okay, what do I do now? I have a couple blog posts on the site about, how to try to save money. I obviously don't recommend, if you're in a healthy marriage or even a marriage where you're fighting, but it's not toxic, it's not abusive. Don't hide money from your spouse. But there are ways to try to save money. There are resources out there that will help you. I do think that speaking to a female in the Christian church is most important for other women, just because of the rate, unfortunately, that we do see of abuse happening in the Christian church by men and even by pastors, which is extremely sad. But it would make me leery to want to speak to a male pastor unless you have a very strong relationship with them already and you completely trust them. But yeah, I'd say one of the first steps is really allowing yourself to take a deep breath, look at what your spouse is doing, and then compare it, like I said, to what they're saying. And it might not be your spouse, but in the comparison, that's when you start to see the two separate people. There's one person that they say they are, and there's one person that they actually are. And when I finally got on the other side of everything and really truly learned what true love was, love that comes from God, this unconditional, not scorekeeping sort of love, it really taught me that love is action. In Christ's actions, we were shown love beyond comprehension. And so when I see that, I go back and I ask myself, or I'm remarried now. I look at my spouse, and I even look at, like I said, I look at my own actions. Am I doing things that tell my spouse I love him? Or am I doing things that tell my spouse I love me? And when I do things that way, I usually stay pretty grounded in making sure that we don't repeat any patterns, and we have a totally functional relationship, which is something that in my marriage, I thought, well, my previous marriage, I thought I was incapable of. So
that's really great advice. I love that. So there's a lot of stuff in the headlines. I think there's probably something right now about a nationwide case that's going on now. I'm not even really sure, but and you see in the headlines all the time, really, people that have like toxic relationships, abusive relationships. I mean, you get the worst possible outcome. Sometimes women just don't know the warning signs, and they get into these relationships and horrible things happen. So can you give us like some red flags that women can look for at the beginning of the relationship, so that, maybe they'll know this person could be capable of abuse?
Yeah. So one thing that I really like, and I heard this advice, I can't say I created this myself, but it's called the no test. The no test with most guys on a first date, even a second date, I'd probably even go as far as a third date to test out the no test, is a simple matter of seeing how they respond to you when you tell them no. They might ask you something as simple as, do you want to go out, or do you want to do something? And you really want to pay close attention, because they might at first say, oh yeah, okay, that's fine. But then maybe a couple of days later, they'll really press the point, or they might almost try to guilt you into it. Oh, well, I was going to go do something Friday, but then you told me you had other plans, and so I'm just sitting at home alone. And those types of things it's very easy for us women to get, especially early on in a relationship, to get excited. Somebody likes me, somebody wants to give me attention. And what a lot of manipulative people do and abusive people do, they actually do something called love bombing, where right away in the beginning, they'll just be like, man, I just feel like we're just meant for each other. And, they tell you all the right things. So I would definitely say the no test is a really good one. Just test out how they react to your no. Obviously, if they immediately act kind of assertive or aggressive, that's going to give you a telltale sign that they care more about controlling how you respond than they care about your actual response. The other thing I would say is really ask them all the questions. In the beginning, you have the opportunity to ask questions. Ask about the ex. Ask about ask about their previous relationships. Ask about how they treat their mom. What kind of relationship do they have with their mother? Do they respect their mother? What kind of relationship do they have with God? Do they pray? Do they have all those things are good things. Now they might say, oh, yes, I do that, or yes, I don't do that. And they might even in the beginning be willing to go to church with you and, claim that they're a Christian. And then later on, you're like, oh, they all of a sudden said that they never really wanted to do that. And they just did in the beginning. Well, you'll know, because a true man of God, they will ask you to read the word with them. They will prompt you to pray. They will always be trying to point you back to God. Something that I read once said, selfish love is you want the other person. And I feel like that is what we see a lot in the media. And we see a lot in toxic relationships. The person just wants the other person. They want control of them. They want them to do the things that they want them to do. But true selfless love is you want good for the other person. So you actually want the other person's life to be good, whether or not that's with you or without you. And right away in the beginning, one of the other things too is I would say, if you're asking about their exes, you got to be really careful, because there will be times that, what's that movie? There's a movie called he's that silly movie. It's not even a Christian movie, but he's just not that into you.
Oh.
Where she says, we think we're the exception, but we're not. And that is the epitome of it. What he tells you, how he feels about the ex, he might even say that they're friends and that they get along. But really what you have to look at, not just like what I just said, not their words. How do they act towards the ex? Are they helping their ex if they have children together? Are they open to that? Do they, more than just get along? Are they, is their relationship like on a friend basis, or, do they have boundaries in place themselves that they are able to abide by? And those are the types of things that I try to look for. And it's hard. There's sometimes you still get the short end of the stick, and you think somebody is really great, and then turns out that they kind of flip a switch on you. But for the most part, if you really pay attention and you don't allow your emotions to get too entangled into it in the beginning, you can look at somebody's actions a lot easier. As Christian women, we have a call to be pure until we get to marriage. And that is so insanely important when it comes to making sure that the person you're with or you're planning to be with, the moment that physical part of the relationship comes into play, whether we like it or not, an emotional part of us gets connected to that person. And it makes it that much difficult, because, you've already brought this physical component in, and God has literally laid a foundation in our brain to have this emotional attachment with our husband. So when we do those things beforehand, it can really cloud our judgment. And I know that I sound so old school when I say that. Listen, I am a sinner too. I understand it, but I can just tell you, it will really help you if you can make sure you maintain a physical distance from the person you're with, so you know what they're really like.
Yeah, I mean, I think they call that soul ties, like
Yeah.
when you have too many of those relationships beforehand, you're bonding with these people, and you've got soul ties with people that's not your husband. And it does affect your real relationship later on in life. It's inevitable. And one other thing about the red flags that really kind of resonated with me was when you talked about the love bombs. When you meet somebody and they're all of a sudden like, oh, you're everything I think we're meant to be, and all these kind of things. And yes, that's great stuff to hear, but you got to be really careful about that, because like you said, they want to control you. And so that's the way that a lot of people get tied into that kind of thing, because they're thinking, oh, maybe this is my soulmate, and maybe, and then everything just spirals out of control. So yeah, that's a really good red flag, especially for younger girls to pay attention to, because that's a trap.
Yes. Yes. And it's hard, especially when, I feel like the better you understand the gospel, the closer you are to God, the closer you are, and the closer you stay to him and understanding his love for you and how he wouldn't choose for you anything less than he would choose for anybody else he loves. You no longer look for that sort of emphatic, fanatic type of love in a spouse. I mean, I don't even expect that kind of love. The love that I receive from God, I don't expect that love from my spouse. But I will say, I got trapped into thinking that that was my spouse's job. My spouse's job was, to love me completely unconditionally. And when I would get in these relationships with these manipulative men, and they'd start out great because they were just fanatical about who I was and how beautiful and how wonderful and how kind. And those are all the things that really I should be getting validation from God and from his word and from what he says about me, and not needing to get validation from the world or the person I'm with. And so therefore, we got trapped. I get trapped.
Yeah.
So,
and a lot of people will put their relationship before God and then realize that, this is not going to work out, because I mean, if you put all that on somebody's shoulders, they're going to disappoint you. Nobody can do that. Nobody can make you completely happy. The only thing that can make you completely happy is the Lord, So, we've talked about the toxic stuff. We've talked about the red flags and all that, but how do we evaluate a relationship for like redeemability, that it can work? How do we look at it that way?
I think that one of the biggest things for redeemability has to do with a true repentant heart. Manipulative people are very good at giving surface sorries, where, they'll say, oh, I apologize. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean it. It won't happen again. But again, this comes back to, you have to look at the actions. A repentant heart will do what it takes, will move mountains to do the things they need to do to make the relationship redeemable, to get back to, and it's never a matter of really getting back to where you started, because you're always kind of growing in a healthy relationship. You're always growing, but it's a matter of them being willing to, hold a mirror up and say, okay, this is something wrong and I clearly cannot control it, where they release control of that thing, which that's the one thing with abusers, is they cannot release control. They cannot release control, and not of themselves, not of you, not of a lot of times their own children. They cannot release control. So if they're willing to release control of this thing for a very long time, we're not talking they go to AA, like if they seem to be having, if their problems seem to be related to alcohol abuse, they go to AA 3 times and all of a sudden they're like, I'm good, and they stop going, or it doesn't become important to them. That's where, if you're in a relationship with somebody like this and you feel like, gosh, I just feel like we'll be really good for a while, and then all of a sudden really, really bad, and then we're really, really good again, and then we're really, really bad. Well, that's called the power wheel. That's called the abuse cycle. So if they're willing to break that by releasing control of what it is they can't control, whether that's their behavior, whether that's an alcohol problem, whether that's a drug addiction that's causing them to, exploit you or to manipulate the people around them, until they are willing to truly do that, you're not in a position where anything is going to be redeemable. And that's heartbreaking, really, to when you get to that point where you understand that this person, whether or not, I think one of the big things that happens, especially in the mental health world, where I write a lot about that, where people will say, okay, but they're just bipolar, or they just have a mental problem, they're sick. Alcoholism is a disease. It truly, truly is. But ultimately, there is a treatment. And if they're not willing to go get that treatment and say, this is causing problems for my spouse, this is causing problems for me, it's causing problems for my family, then they're not at a point where they're ready to do anything that would actually be any sort of selfless love. It's not to say that those people don't love and care about us on some level. I think it's just a matter of whether or not it's going to be a healthy relationship to maintain. So I think that is one of the biggest things is again, going back to just making sure that you're paying attention to the person's actions and not their words, because they will say whatever they can say. But actions, I mean, sounds cliche, but actions truly do speak louder than words. And when your judgment is clouded, that is the only thing you have to go by. Unfortunately, a lot of times I talk to women who say that, once they start evaluating it that way, they almost immediately realize what's really going on, that they really are being abused. And then they feel grief.
Yeah.
Which is a major part.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, and when your confidence is shaken like that, you really do have to dig deep and remember that you have to protect yourself.
Mm-hmm. You do.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're getting a little close to time, so we'll go ahead and wrap it up. But I did want to remind everybody there's a couple of buttons below this video. And when you click on them, Lacy's got a free gift and a special offer for you. So Lacy, you want to tell everybody what those are?
Yeah. So the Leap of Faith quiz is I was discussing it actually with my husband, because I feel like I kind of went over it with him when we were in the dating courting phase. It's just a quick kind of reminder of different things you can look for, different red flags you can look for in a new dating situation, if that's what you are doing. And if you are Christian specifically, it's going to ask you some hard questions, and but things that you'll know by the second or third date about this person. And then it's going to give you a simple score that will tell you whether or not this person has possibility of being abusive later on, or whether maybe they're worth that leap of faith, so to speak. And then I also have a promo with that to go for our it's actually a ebook that I wrote with another writer of mine. Her name's Sarah. She writes a blog called A Place No Man Can Follow, which is also about surviving domestic violence, and it's a Christian's perspective. We wrote it together. It's called Finding Faith After Exodus, and it's relating your worthiness to God, to his love for you, and helping you understand that, when God chose the Israelites, he told them, it is not because you are strong. It is not because you are smarter than the rest. It is not because you are, anything worldly. It is because I have loved you. So, and that's what that will talk about. So.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you so much for offering these to our viewers. And Lacy, thank you so much for sharing your words of wisdom today. Do you have any final insights that you'd like to share before we wrap it up?
Oh, goodness. No, I don't think I do. I think I've talked your ear off. So I'm sure they feel like they've got a head full. So. Oh
gosh, well, you've been a blessing to speak with today. So we do appreciate that you came on here to talk to everybody. So thank you again. And thank you everybody for joining us today. And we will see you again soon.
Avaya has changed my life.
Avaya has made me the woman I am today.
Avaya is my home.
Avaya is personal freedom.
Avaya is the reason my life continuously improves.
Let everyone in your life know about Avaya.
Everyone needs to know about this amazing company.
Thank you, Avaya, for appearing in my inbox.
What Ike Allen and Andy Anderson have created at Avaya is what the world needs.